So let's talk about our agenda for today. We've got a big agenda. We normally do a 2-hour spring training, but today um, we we're going for a 3-hour training because we have so much to talk about. We're going to start off with a session, I guess we'll call it a session on HB 182. If you want, you can indicate in the chat whether you're familiar with this bill. This is a bill that we get a lot of questions about. So we're happy and excited to give you some more information on that bill. Next, we'll have the great honor of having Whitney Wallace present to us from Tooele County School District. She's going to be giving us a great presentation that she gave at C-Forum a couple months ago that we're really excited about. So thank you, Whitney, for being willing to do that. We're going to take a 10-minute break so you can, do what you need to do during that time. Following that, we'll have John introduce some of the new resources that the student data privacy team has to present to you. I'm going to do a session on myth-busting directory information, which I'm really excited about. We'll take another 10-minute break, and then we'll have the privilege from hearing from Jeremy and Melissa, who are going to be talking to us about another really big bill, HB 491, which I think you'll find helpful. We'll kind of start wrapping things up with HB 84, which Melissa will present, and then I'll do a short presentation on other legislative items. And then we'll have a closing. Please note that after the presentations are over, we're going to stop the recording, and then, but you're welcome to stay on, and we'll allow you to unmute yourselves at that time if you would like to just ask questions. So that's an opportunity for you. Speaking of questions, if you have questions as we go along, it's a big groups, but we want you to be have the opportunity to ask questions. So please feel free to actively utilize the chat. Jeremy and Melissa are going to be acting as our question masters. So they're going to be kind of keeping track of questions in the chat. Some of the questions we might answer in the chat, and others we will answer verbally. So I invite Jeremy and Melissa to interject themselves at any time during anyone's presentation if they feel that if they see a question in the chat that would be best answered in the moment. Otherwise, they will be compiling the questions with their accompanying answers in a Google Doc, and we'll make that available after the training. And then, as I mentioned, you'll have an opportunity to ask verbal questions after the recording is over if you'd like. Jeremy will be monitoring the chat as well as Melissa, and keep your eye open for links to materials in the chat. And one last shout out to the resources document. Thank you, Melissa, for dumping that in the chat again. And again, this is a really great opportunity. This is a great resource for you to have the agenda, but also links to slides and other stuff. So I'm Katie. I'm the Director of Privacy. And I also want to acknowledge I know that at least some of you are new to your role as a privacy person in your district or charter school. So welcome. We want you to know that I know that this new role can feel potentially overwhelming. Also understand that if there's stuff that we talk about today, whether you're new or not new, that feels overwhelming, we get it, and we are really happy to help and support. So please reach out if you have questions. I love that about our team, that we enjoy supporting LEAs. So please reach out. John and Nicole in particular are really great at doing onboardings for brand new data managers. So you could reach out to them specifically, but anyone on the team is going to be very helpful. And then we also have on the call Melissa, who's our data privacy and governance specialist. Jeremy Zabriskie, who's relatively new to our team, who is our data privacy and security specialist. So he brings that excellent expertise to the group. I'll also note that he is from a charter school. So that's a fun connection for the many of you who come from the charter school space. And we're also always really grateful to have Nicole here. She's an amazing administrative assistant, and she is running our Zoom meeting today. So here's the team. All right, now we're going to dive in. So Nicole Sanchez, who is here with us today, I'm going to be giving the presentation, but Nicole did the bulk of the work on this. If there is anything wonderful about this presentation, it's thanks to Nicole. If there's anything that is subpar, that's thanks to me. So you can blame me for anything that's less than awesome. But as I mentioned, this is a really big bill that was passed in this last legislative session. And I don't mean big in terms of like size, but it's going to have big ramifications for LEAs. You may have already heard of it. Oh, and by the way, LEA is an acronym for Local Education Agency, which means a district or charter school. So we're excited to talk about this today. Again, make sure to ask questions in the chat as we go along. All right, so this bill, HB 182, as is often the case, sometimes bills put in place a brand new law, but in this case, this is an amendment to an existing law. The existing law is something we've talked about before, which is what we call Utah PPRA. We actually did a training on this in the spring training last year. And this law requires schools to get parental consent before students answer questions about certain topics. So this might sound familiar to you. And those protected topics are these: political affiliations or philosophies, mental or psychological problems, sexual behavior, orientation or attitudes, religious affiliations or beliefs. So as a reminder, this law has been in place for a long time. If you want to ask questions about these topics, of students, then you need to get parent consent. So that's been in place for a while. However, this bill makes a few changes. One of them is that it adds some clarity about the protected topics. There was a time, previously we did not have clarity in the law about whether gender identity was considered a protected topic. We knew that if you wanted to ask a student about their sexual behavior or orientation, that you needed to get parent consent, but gender identity wasn't expressly written into the bill. And now it is. So we have already given the guidance on this in the past, but now it's like super duper official that if you're ever going to ask a student a question about gender identity, including their preferred pronouns, you need to get parent consent first. We know that there are some teachers that have in the past included a question about preferred pronouns in like a getting to know you survey at the beginning of the year. So you'll want to communicate to your teachers that that's not an appropriate thing to do unless they have received parent consent first. And then also note that there are some occasions where when a student is registering for an app that it asks them questions about their gender. So that's something to keep in mind, keep an eye out for as well. All right, that's actually one of the simpler changes. These other changes are more significant. There's a new requirement to gather parent consent and provide notice at the time of registration. And this applies specifically to 3 types of surveys. So not all surveys, but these 3 specific ones. LEAs are required to provide notice of the survey and collect parent consent at the time the student registers. These are the 3 surveys, and then we'll break them down a little bit. The first is surveys associated with an early warning system. Some of you use a program called Panorama. That's an example of an early warning system. Some of you use other programs, and some of you don't currently use anything. But for those of you who do use an early warning system, and any surveys associated with that would require parent consent at the time of student registration. Second, and this is the vague one, the language in the bill is surveys with social emotional learning questions. And we'll talk about that in a minute. You can see that's, you can imagine that's going to be pretty tricky to interpret. And then finally, this one is nice here. If you administer the school climate survey, then you'll need to get parent consent for that at the time a student registers. So let's break these down. Early warning system surveys. Melissa is going to talk a little bit later about this new requirement, which is that all LEAs, all districts and charters, will now be required to use an early warning system because of a different bill that passed called HB 84. So using an early warning system will no longer be optional. However, administering the surveys that are associated with an early warning system is not a requirement. An example with Panorama is you can use Panorama to identify students who may be in need of, some like interaction with a supportive adult based on, not great attendance. So if you have a student that's starting to miss a lot of school, an early warning system can help a school identify which students might be falling through the cracks, for example. And it gives an opportunity for the school to make sure to check in with that student and provide them with any supports they need. That's the main purpose of an early warning system. Sometimes early warning systems have a separate survey component that's made available to them. Panorama is one of those. And the survey might have questions about social emotional learning or like questions about like resiliency and potentially like emotional regulation. So those are a possibility with an early warning system. And so you'll want to be aware of whether or not your LEA is administering those surveys. If they are, you need to get parent consent at the time of registration. This one, surveys with social emotional learning questions. This is the one that everyone I've spoken with has had a lot of questions about, because it's quite broad. I want to mention here, so USBE does have a definition of social emotional learning, SEL for short. And, but as is the case with a lot of definitions, I mean, if you write your own policy, like you'll want to write your own policy, which we'll talk about in a minute, but if you do, you could refer to this definition, but you don't have to. The reason I'm showing you this definition is because I wanted to point out a phenomenon that we've been aware of and that other people have mentioned, which is that some social emotional learning questions can be very tricky to distinguish from traditional instruction. Here's an example of one. Set and achieve positive goals. So one of the questions that we've asked on our team, and Nicole Sanchez, having recently come from the classroom, said, well, how would that apply to, for example, an exit ticket where I ask my students, as a teacher, I have an exit ticket that asks my students, how do they feel about their achievement in their work today? Does that apply to this? Does that count as a survey with social emotional learning questions? And the answer is the bill does not define it at all. And so my recommendation to you would be to work to develop a policy at your LEA that helps you understand how to deal with this one, because right now it feels a little unruly and a little bit hard to understand. So that's the task for you, is to figure that out. You're welcome to, refer to USBE's definition of social emotional learning in that policy if you want to, but you're not obligated to. All right, the school climate. Let's see, I did see a question in the chat. Jerry asks, what for the requirement to have an early warning system, EWS, what is the timeline for that? That's a good question. I cannot remember. Melissa might be addressing that in her presentation. If not, we will answer that in our Q&A document. Thanks, Jerry. It's not this year, I don't think, for the record. And Sue asks if USB will be releasing a model policy. I would say, I'm going to get to that question a little bit later, but that topic a little bit later. I would say a model policy, no. We might be administering, the USB might be releasing guidance, but probably not an actual model policy. And I'll explain why in a little bit. Okay, so
a question earlier on,
yes,
started about how often, I'm assuming, because the question is from Paul Lewis, must this be renewed each year or just when they initially register into the LEA?
That's a good question, Paul. The answer is annually. The bill is specific about that. The consent needs to be obtained annually. Additionally, if there's a student that transfers into your LEA mid-year, for example, that opportunity to provide consent needs to be given to that student at that time. Or if they transfer out and then even back in within the same school year, the bill says that they need to get consent again. Okay, Kate makes a note that there is already a PPRA model policy. Is that going to meet this criteria if we add the new item? Yeah, let's talk about that model policy. So a couple years ago, I went through that model policy. I'm assuming, Kate, you're talking about the one that the student data privacy team published. Is that accurate? Or are you, okay, so here's the deal with that policy. There is a federal law PPRA, and then there's Utah PPRA. They are very similar, except that Utah PPRA is more restrictive, and it's a little bit more specific. And what I found when I reviewed our model policy is that it's not exactly sufficient. There's some language that is residual to the federal law and doesn't totally represent the Utah law. It's a very messy mesh of those, or well, the meshing of those two laws is very messy. And I think when we made the policy, we didn't, it's not, I wouldn't say, I don't even like really recommend it. It's okay. But it's not perfectly sufficient. So to answer your question, Kate, I think if there were some tweaks to the model policy that we already have, I think it could be sufficient. So all that is to say, I think Kate makes a good point that there is a starting place that you could start from, but I fully acknowledge that I don't think that even our model policy is sufficient. Okay, thanks, Kate. I also have a tendency to say things that could be said in 2 words in like 5 sentences, so sorry about that. All right. Keep the questions coming, and again, yeah, Melissa, thanks for bringing that up. Let me know if other questions come in. Okay, school climate survey. There's a big change here. Formerly, like up until now, all LEAs were required to administer USBE's model school climate survey. And this is the one that's administered through Qualtrics, and I believe it's usually administered in the spring. This bill changes things so that LEAs are no longer required to administer the school climate survey. However, LEAs may continue to opt in to using the school climate survey. I will mention that USBE staff are still planning to provide and support you on administering that survey. And it is still the case that when you're developing your school discipline policies, there's a board rule all about this linked here, that they're still required to be informed by, quote, data obtained by any regular safety or health related survey, including a school climate survey. So there is potentially benefit to continuing administering the school climate survey, but the option exists for you to no longer do that if you don't want to. You'll just have to find another way to obtain this data to inform your school discipline policies. And just to reiterate, USB is not abandoning the school climate survey. We will continue to administer that. But the bill says you're no longer required to administer it. Okay, oh well, and I'll just to tie the whole thing up together, if you continue to administer the school climate survey, you will need to get parent consent for that survey at the time of registration, as with the other 2 surveys we just talked about.
Hey, Katie, I got a question that just came in. That's a good one.
Yes, please.
Is there a notification or document requirement for the PPRA consent in addition to the other consent?
Yes, and I hate to I hate to be like, just wait for it, but there is a slide in a minute that will talk about that. So I don't know who asked that question, but if I don't answer that question sufficiently by the time we're done, will you let me know? And okay. And Alex asks, for the school climate survey from USBE, will we be able to administer it yearly now or just on odd years? That's a good question. I don't think there's anything that would prevent you from administering it on your own annually, but I believe that USBE staff will only be like opening up the formal Qualtrics survey and doing our collection every other year, I believe, Alex. But I will ask the gal who manages that. I'll ask her about that and we'll put that in the Q&A doc. Okay, the survey I received from USPE was for teachers only. Is the student one? Yes, the one that needs to be opted into is the student one. So the school climate survey has multiple versions. One is for educators, one is for principals, one is for parents, one is for students. The student one is the one that needs to be opted into. At least that's my reading of it. But now I'm like second guessing myself. Colleen, I'm going to look into that for you. Yes, thank you. I will say obtaining the consent at the time of student registration suggests to me that it's just for students, because otherwise, how would that work? So I'm gonna say for now, I believe it's just for students, but I guess we could ask about that. Okay. All right, so timeline for collecting consent. Let's see, I'm about out of time, so we'll try to move through this pretty quickly. Timeline for collecting consent goes like this. For those 3 surveys I mentioned, the ones that are required to get consent at the time of registration, this needs to happen at the beginning of the school year or when a new student transfers into the school, or as I mentioned, if they transfer back into the school. As you know, a lot of students can kind of come and go between your LEA. They leave and then they come back in the same year. So anytime that they re-enter your school system, they need to be given another chance to grant consent. For those other broader protected topic surveys, those Utah PPRA surveys, those ones, the requirement for the timeline requirement remains the same. It's 2 weeks in advance of administering the survey. Although parents do have the ability to waive their right to 2 weeks, the 2 weeks notice. All right, anytime you give someone the opportunity to provide consent, best practice is to provide them with a notice that kind of explains what's involved in the survey. That's best practice always, but this bill goes beyond just best practice and says you have to do it. So this is where I think I'll answer the question, Nicole Sanchez, that you brought up. The bill is pretty specific about what the notice needs to include. And I will say that these notice requirements are both for those surveys that you need to get consent at the time of registration and for those other protected topic surveys. This notice requirement applies to both. And a lot of this is stuff that is already included in your notice, but in some cases it's a little more specific. So previously the language was that you needed to provide in the notice a link to the survey. That has changed. Now the language says that the notice needs to include the survey. I don't know exactly what that will look like. But that's what it says. And then it also needs to be clear on the intended purpose and use for collecting the data to make that transparent to parents. It also needs to include the types of persons or government entities that share the collected data. This one's interesting, including a list of recipients who will receive the student level data versus aggregate results, and a list of the types of persons or government entities that receive the data collected from a government entity on a regular or contractual basis. It also asks that, or says that the notice needs to include the record series if applicable. And feel free to throw questions in the chat on this. My feeling is that this is going to be like, you're going to need to sit down for a survey and I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 people get together and just sort of grapple with this. Like, what does this actually look like? There's a possibility, it's unknown, but there's a possibility that USPE will be giving some like example language of what a notice might look like. But that's up in the air right now. And so it's possible that this is something you'll need to kind of grapple with on your own. When you're collecting consent, there's a few little nuances that the bill spells out. Can you incentivize a student to participate in a survey? No, this was an important part of the bill for the sponsor, that it's you're not allowed to provide an incentive for participation, and you can't punish a student for not participating. Can you use consent that another school collected? The answer is no. You need to obtain your own consent at the time when the student registers at your school. And can you collect consent after registration if you need to? The answer to this is dependent upon the type of survey. For those protected topic surveys, the answer is yes, you can collect consent after registration, so long as it's 2 weeks before the survey is administered. But for those specific 3 surveys, no, it can only be collected at the time of registration. Otherwise, your window is closed, and then that student just won't be able to participate in those surveys.
Hey,
Okay,
Kate, sorry, I
yes.
had a question about this that I answered, and I want to make sure that I'm right. This takes effect in the summer, so this needs to be part of their registration for this coming fall. Is that correct?
Yes, so I believe I think it goes into effect in May of this year. So yes, my recommendation would be if you're going to build this into your registration process, which you'll need to start working on that in May. Acknowledging that most registration windows are already open, it's possible that this won't, be fully functioning until students are registering for the next school year. But so yeah, that's my recommendation. Nicole asks, are you able to provide an incentive for completing a consent process rather than the survey itself? That's a good question. I'll answer it this way. There's nothing in the bill that says that you can't, well, let me explain what Nicole is talking about. Some schools do something where if a student returns a form for a survey, regardless of whether the parent says yes or no, just the act of returning the form, they might, reward that student with like a piece of candy, or, oh, the first class who brings back all their forms gets a donut party or something like that. That happens in some schools. There's nothing in the bill that says that you can't do that. However, I will say that there are some like misinterpretations of that. Like some people see that behavior and they think, and by some people, I mean like some parents and policymakers, they're seeing that behavior and they're thinking that it means that you're incentivizing a student to participate in the survey. So you might want to reconsider that policy from like a perception perspective. You wouldn't want parents to be under the impression that you're like encouraging the students to take the survey. So that probably warrants a conversation with your LEA to see if that practice is worth it, knowing that it could be confusing and potentially concerning to parents. Okay. All right, great. I'm going to try to wrap up in 5 minutes. Okay. What if a student starts talking about one of the protected topics, even though I haven't asked them questions? This is a really important part of this bill that's not new, actually. But I thought Nicole Sanchez was really wise in noting that this is something that we should include because we didn't talk about it last year. The law currently already specifically speaks to this, and it says that students are not prohibited from volunteering information on protected topics. For example, if you're a teacher and a student walks up to you and is like, "Hey, identify as male," while that is a protected topic that you couldn't ask them about, there's nothing that says a student can't just tell you voluntarily. So that already exists in place. However, then the question becomes, well, what about asking follow-up questions? So Nicole put together this flow chart that I think is super helpful. If a student volunteers information and what they tell you is describing self-harm, or it might be information that suggests that the student might be at risk of hurting themselves or others, the law specifically allows school employees to ask further questions if the goal is to get additional information for the purpose of informing parents and referring the student to necessary services. So obviously the goal is keeping kids safe. So if you or teachers need to ask questions to keep that kid safe, you can under this law, but just always make sure that keeping parents informed is a really high priority. There is one exception where if the student is in the law, that if a student is describing, abuse that they're experiencing from home, then the correct course of action is to talk to DCFS, not directly to the parent necessarily. But there's more information about that in the law itself. If they're not describing something about, self-harm or hurting themselves or others, then the answer is no. You should not move forward asking them additional questions unless you have parent consent. So school counselors, for example, these kinds of questions may come up, so they should make sure that they have parent consent before they move forward with asking additional questions about protected topics. All right, so here's your to-do list. We encourage you to update your policies where applicable. In particular, this is not guidance from me and like you have to do this, but like personally, I think if I were in your situation in an LEA, I would find it really helpful to develop a policy that gives some clarity on that second survey that we talked about, surveys including social emotional learning questions. In order to do training for staff and in order to execute that practice, I feel like you're going to need to have some kind of policy, and we encourage you to, develop that locally. You're also going to want to identify which surveys you'll be administering this upcoming year, create notices to accompany those surveys, and then update your registration process. A few of you are still doing registration in a paper pencil format, so that might, involve just adding some pages to your registration packet. But for a lot of you, that might involve communicating with your SIS vendor to get that information added to your registration process. And finally, make sure that you train staff on these changes. Especially teachers are going to need to be, reminded that gender identity questions are not appropriate without parent consent. Okay, the question about guidance from USBE. This has been an interesting topic because staff at USBE are receiving a lot of questions about this bill, but it is always the case that we have to kind of balance, we as staff and the board has to balance this, I was going to say dichotomy, but that's not the right, maybe it's a dichotomy. This, the extent to which we give guidance or legal analysis can in some ways diminish an LEA's local control. And so our feeling on this bill is that this is largely going to be something that is probably best handled at the LEA level. I realize that can be kind of discouraging because people are asking questions and wanting help on this. So I'll just say that the extent to which we will be publishing guidance is still up for debate. I'm a part of a working group that's trying to figure this out. But if we do publish some guidance on this, we'll be sending out through our regular channels. So just keep your eyes peeled. And I hope that you will kind of understand, again, the goal there with any limitations on the guidance that we provide is hoping to allow you to maintain local control to the extent possible. Alex asks if we need to have a separate notice for each survey. The answer is yes. Separate survey notice for each survey, because the pieces of information will be different. Like the purpose, for example, will be different. The survey will be different. So you could staple them all together if you're doing a paper version, but they need to be unique to the survey that they're tied to. All right, any other questions that people have? Feel free to ask them in the chat. And team, I did go a little bit over time, so my apologies. However, hopefully it'll be okay considering that some of our other presentations went under schedule. So, okay, go ahead and continue putting stuff in the chat if you have any questions. And again, some guidance might be published by USB, and if so, it'll be sent out through like our traditional communication channels.
Okay, so we're going to talk about how to set up workflows to automate your Learn platform request and review process. This took a little bit of tweaking for us to finally get this to where it works best for our district, but we feel like we're there. So to start, you need to create review groups. This is going to be who's doing reviews for your district. So we have privacy, security, network, curriculum, and you can have as many as you need. Our curriculum is broken down into each curriculum director's area. So we have some interesting mixes like math and sex ed, and science and driver's ed and arts, but those are what our curriculum directors are assigned to. In order to create your groups, you log into Learn platform, select members, and then groups, and then create new group. You can assign members to that group once you have named it. our members are pulled in through one roster, and we set that up with Madra. And so it pulls in all of our staff so that they can log in and be part of Learn Platform. Your reviewers, you want them to be set up as admin so that they have all of the accessibility they need to complete their reviews and to check out the analysis portion and see what's being used and how much and by whom. So that's step one. Step two, you need to have your review groups create and assign forms. So we had all of our groups get together and make their form that they would fill out when they were reviewing a product on Learn Platform. And then this form needs to be assigned to their group so that when it's part of the workflow, it'll show. And on the last slide, we have our resources, which shows exactly how our workflow is set up so that you can copy that format if you choose. Okay, the third step, you've got to build your workflow, and this is the most challenging step. We learned that Learn Platform didn't quite have as many conditionals as we needed, so we had to make a couple workarounds. This took a few Zoom calls with Madra to get all set up, but I'm going to show you what it looks like in our Learn Platform. So in our workflow, this is under settings and then workflow. We're editing our workflow, our new product. We have our starting event. So you have to determine what your starting event is. Ours, we have a blanket request form that staff can fill out to request a new product. The first automation is to set it as pending and the privacy status is unknown. The requester gets an email. It says we've received your request for, and then it puts the product name. And then we give them a little blurb about when our review windows are, and we will get through it as soon as possible. We haven't totally stuck to the review windows, and we're thinking that in the fall, we're gonna take those off and just complete them as we come in. This was mostly so that our curriculum directors weren't drowning as we pushed this process this year. So everybody's been keeping up fairly well. So after the requester gets the email, I'm the first person that it comes to because I do the privacy review. So there's our name, the form, and reviewers. So they all match. And I only gave myself 5 days, but you can change that to however you need. And then you'll add a step, and this is where ours gets a little interesting. So our workflow goes to our initial curriculum review, and our executive director of teaching and learning will have to assign to a specific curriculum director. So he goes in and he does have to submit the form, even though it's basically just asking him, did you assign to a curriculum director? Because if he doesn't complete the form, it will stop here and wait. And so then what he does is he has to go into this management portion on the left. And in the library, he can look for whichever app we're looking at. And then I made a new column to assign conditional reviewers. And he clicks the drop down and selects who needs to do the review. He's then continuing the workflow. Once he selects whomever it needs to go to, as long as he has submitted his form, the workflow will continue and jump to whichever curriculum director it was assigned to. And so he can select more than one if necessary. We've had that come up with a couple math and science overlapping programs and apps, but for the most part, it's just one. And these guys get 14 days, and they've done really well at keeping on top of their 14 days. It doesn't stop the workflow if they're behind. It just marks it as past due. And then once it's made it through curriculum, it comes to our network review. Our network review team has their own form. They're the reviewers. You can have more than one person in your review group. So we have a couple in this one. Once it gets past them, it lands at our final security review. And again, all of those match 14 days. Once it's past final security review, it comes back to me. because it's telling me that it's made it through the workflow and I need to go mark it for our library. And I'll show you in a little bit all of the different things that I mark in our library. But it comes back to me telling me the product needs to be marked, but then it also sends an automated email to the requester once I have marked it. So it tells them their product has been marked as approved or not approved, and then how to view why a status was assigned. And so they can see why it was approved or denied. And then lastly, it sends another automated email to our IT director and our IT secretary so that they can see if a product has been approved, which means they can push purchase orders forward. And so all of that is our workflow. Workflows can be stopped at any time, and I've stopped a few after me. If it doesn't pass the privacy review, it's not going to pass. So I can go in and force stop the workflow and mark the product from there. So then once you have that, yes.
This is Katie. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a good question in the chat. Grant is wondering,
Excellent.
how many hours would you estimate you and your team have spent setting up Learn platform?
Oh, that's a great question. Do you want from start to finish or from when I came into the position?
I imagine both would probably be helpful.
Okay. Before I came into the position, this wasn't really assigned to anyone specifically. It was a very large group effort for a lot of people who don't have time in their day-to-day work to get it done. So also on the resources slide at the very end, I have a link to another slide I put together about our entire Learn platform journey. And on that one, the very first step is to determine your point of contact for Learn platform. I've been in this position for about a year now. And once somebody was dedicated to the Learn platform process, my job is split 50-50, but I do spend about half of every day on Learn platform. It moved significantly faster. And your point of contact, this stuff is going to fall mostly to them. Our curriculum team, it probably took them a half an hour to make their form, and then I do the rest. And so I've spent, gosh, I would say it took me about 2 weeks, now not solid all day, every day, but to get this all put together with Madra. So I'm hoping that there will be folks out there who can copy our workflow and save themselves a lot of time. Madra has said that they are coming out, hopefully in the near future, with more conditionals for each review workflow. But until then, there are a couple caveats you can build in. So it does take a little bit of time, but it is definitely worth it. Okay. Step 4. Now, after you have your review groups, your forms, and you've built that workflow, this step is outside of the workflow, but it is going to make your life easier for managing your library. So the first thing you have to do is you have to create tags. You have to go to settings, then to tags, and then add a tag. It's going to allow you to create terms for your district and set definitions. And then we went even farther and created badges. I'll show you what all of that looks like here in a sec. Because then you're going to work across the top that you can see over here. You start with tags, make your tag groups, make your filters, make your lists. So what that looks like, I'm in settings, I'm in tags. You add a tag, and I set mine to public because I want our teachers, I want our parents, I want everybody to be able to see them. So you name your tag and you create it. So these are the ones that we use. We want to know for our help desk people, when people call and are like, I'm locked out of my program for this, we want them to know, okay, who manages the accounts? Sometimes it's the district, sometimes it's student services, sometimes it's the school. And then you can add a definition. So approved as non-primary instructional material has a definition set by teaching and learning. So you can put that in there. And then these are the badges. They're just colored icons. So green means yes, it's good. Red, no, it's not. And so just kind of giving a visual. So once you have your tags created, you have to create a tag group. And again, just like making the tags, create the tag group, and then you select the tags you want to fall under that group. So ours, this is how we created the assigned conditional reviewers. It's a tag group, and then we put all of our curriculum areas into that group. Now, curriculum and data privacy and management, all the way down, these are all visible when you go into a program in our library. They can see, okay, it was curriculum approved, awesome. Oh, it has sensitive material, that's why it didn't pass. All of these can make it not pass. And then, okay, it didn't pass data privacy, why? Oh, there was no DPA. Or they collect and distribute PII. So we can mark all of that so that they don't have any unanswered questions when they view our library. You can set filters. This isn't a requirement. I set it so that I could control where they were all visible in. I wanted them to be visible everywhere. But then lists. This is going to help clean up your product library because it's going to make the list. Reason for assigned status. This is where you want your teachers to go. It's a checklist, tells them exactly why a product was marked the way it was. Primary, it gives them the definition so that they know what our district means when they say this is a primary material or a non-primary instructional material. And then management, this is who they can contact for help when they get locked out of something or they need training or anything like that. And the very last step is to edit your columns. So your columns are what are going to show in your management portion. And this is going to help you when it's time to mark those apps at the end of your workflow. So very similar to tags, you got to go to settings and then go to columns. You're going to adjust your column and then add your tag groups for what the column is going to be. And what that looks like is, again, we're in settings. And then we're going to go to columns. And these are my columns I have in use. A lot of these are the Learn Platform default ones. And you can add or hide and reorder. So I use status, privacy status, primary, non-primary, our conditional reviewers, our notes, reason for assignment, assigned status, management, and when that DPA expires. And then what this is going to look like is when I go in, or when our staff go in, sorry, they can see all of these things. And I'll show you this in Learn Platform as well, but they don't have to hunt for it. They don't have to call anybody. They don't have to email. It's all right there, right for them to see. So I'll show you a couple of views. So from management, when I get that notification from our workflow that it's time for me to mark a product for our library, I come in here, I set the status, the privacy status, whether it's a primary or non-primary. This I skip because remember, this one is part of the workflow for curriculum directors. If reviewers left any notes, I'll include them in there. And then the reason for the assigned status, it gives me this little check. I just scroll down and check everything that I need. And then same thing for management. It's going to give me this little drop down, check whomever manages it, and if there's training provided. And then lastly, when my DPA expires. This helps because I also have a couple workflows for data privacy agreements. One is giving me a warning that it expires in 60 days. And two is telling me, hey, it expired today, so that I can go into SDPC and re-add the new one. But then for our teachers, they see this. Unfortunately, they can't see the nice little table in management yet. I'm hoping that that'll be a Learn Platform add-on later. But if they go in to a program, they click details. And then they can see, okay, curriculum says yes, security says yes, we have a state contract, so we're good. It's managed by the individual teacher or school, and primary or non-primary. The badges that I talked about briefly show up right here. So we see all this green, we say, awesome, good to go. And so with that, on this very last page, and this should be in the documents that we all have access to, the first link is a link to every single form that our teams have created so that you can get ideas, you can use them, whatever works to help you guys get your system streamlined, all the questions that each group answers, and organized in the order of our workflow. And then the second one is our workflow in depth. It's that screen I showed you on Learn Platform, and so it just kind of shows everything that's marked, what it's marked, how that automation is set. And then the last link links to that very start to basically, if you haven't started Learn Platform, this is a great way to kick off. Tells you step by step what I've found to work best for our district and how to get this program off the ground and get our teachers and staff using it. And so hopefully we're just trying to make it easier for everyone else, because I felt like I was a little bit baptized by fire, but we feel really good about it. And we feel like we've got buy-in, and it feels really good right now. Let's see, I haven't looked at the chat. So any questions you've seen out there, Katie or Nicole?
Yeah, so, well, and if I can just take a second and this is less of a answering a question and more of just kind of like stating some of like a summary, I guess, of what I've heard in the chat. Is that okay, Whitney?
Yes, please.
So some folks are feeling like, a lot of folks are like, this is so cool. And then some folks are like, I'm feeling overwhelmed. Do you have anything you want to say to the overwhelmed folks? I appreciate what you just said about the journey element of this. Anything you'd like to speak to in terms of those who are feeling overwhelmed?
I was totally overwhelmed. If you haven't shed a few tears about Learn Platform, I don't think that you've used a Learn Platform. But I can say John and Nicole have been so wonderful in helping me, and Madra is fantastic. But also, I'm happy to field any calls and help. If you want me to hop on Zoom with you and help walk you through stuff, I'm more than happy to do that as well. I don't want, if we can eliminate stress, I would love to help eliminate stress.
I love that. Thanks, Whitney. That's really amazing. Are you okay if I take a couple more minutes and kind of like tie some thoughts together? Okay, great. So I want to kind of level set with everyone. So what Whitney just showed us is an amazing workflow for approving the use of EdTech products. I'll say that what Whitney showed us is amazing and best practice, but I want to clarify that there's no requirement to use Learn Platform or another product like it. It's just a helpful way to manage what a lot of districts and charter schools are struggling to do without some kind of solution. I also want to clarify that Learn Platform is a paid product, but USBE, the Utah State Board of Education, has a contract with Learn Platform, and we provide it for free to any districts and charter schools who are participating in the Digital Teaching and Learning Grant Program, which is most of you. And if you aren't participating in that program, it's possible that we could still get you an account for free. So feel free to reach out. There's also been a lot of talk about Madra. Madra is an individual. She doesn't work for USBE, but she works for Learn Platform. She's their customer success manager. And she's been a great partner because Utah has this statewide contract. Learn Platform has done a really good job partnering and providing support for us as a state. So she is a powerful ally and she understands Utah's privacy requirements surrounding educational technology and the requirement to maintain a metadata dictionary. So she's just great in that way. And yeah, a couple people are putting her contact information in the chat. John and Nicole are also on my team, are also happy to connect you with her. I love a few people, Whitney, just like you, offered to give support. Ross from Jordan District is also like a super amazing Learn Platform guru, and he offered in the chat to give some support. So I think there's a big community of people who are happy to help. But I do just want to also reiterate that what Whitney just showed you is not like a legal requirement or anything. It's something that it's a really great solution that Tooele District has found to meet a need that they identified. But it's not like an obligation for you as a data manager, for example, to use Learn Platform. Just wanted to clear that up. All right, team, is there anyone else who wants to speak to any of the questions that we saw in the chat?
There was an additional question that I thought was really good from Corey Little. He asked if there's a place to include justification and FERPA exception, or if they use something else for their compliance review.
So there is in Learn Platform, you have to add like different definitions. We do not use Learn Platform for our metadata dictionary. It kind of appears over here. There are some districts who do it and do it really well. We use SDPC. I like having the actual DPA and all of that stuff. I personally, it was strictly a personal choice. I feel like Learn Platform for our district works better for our teachers to get the information they need, but I like the layout of SDPC with how the justification, the purpose, and all of that is laid out in there for parents better. So strictly personal preference.
That's great. So in summary, Tooele District uses the Student Data Privacy Consortium SDPC to meet their metadata dictionary requirement, but they use Learn Platform like internally. I will say, Corey, to answer your question, Madra from Learn Platform, we've spent lots of time explaining to her Utah's metadata dictionary requirement. So she worked with the product people and developed a way to enter, the FERPA exception, the justification, all of those things that are required to meet that metadata dictionary requirement. So there are some people who are using it in that way, as Whitney mentioned, but it's again, it's a choice. Team, do you see any other questions or comments that you'd like to point out? And Whitney, you're just amazing. Thanks for this, by the way.
Thanks, Katie.
Anything else that people want to point out or ask? Christian asks, how long do we expect Learn Platform to be provided? That's a great question. My understanding is that the funding is ongoing for at least a year, but maybe more. But I do remember hearing, don't quote me on this because I'm just remembering it from an email, but I think I heard from a USBE staff member that Learn Platform will not be the only contracted provider of an EdTech management system in the coming years. They're going to open it up for contracts with other vendors as well. So Learn Platform will almost certainly be one of them, but they won't be the only one anymore, is my understanding. But there's been no conversation about like the funding leaving or anything. It's kind of wrapped into the Digital Teaching and Learning Grant Program funding structure, to answer your question. And Robert says, thanks, Whitney, for sharing. I second that. Amazing. Well, I encourage you guys, I really appreciate Whitney and Ross both volunteering to help people who are interested in moving forward. As we've mentioned, Madra is a great resource too. John and Nicole are always happy to help. And Jeremy too. Now we have his expertise from using Jeremy's school that he came from, Franklin Discovery Academy. They used Learn Platform as their metadata dictionary very effectively, and it was really great looking. So you've got some resources to reach out to. Anything else you want to add, Whitney, before we take a break?
No, I think that is a lot of information. So
It is.
hopefully a good starting point.
Yes, I completely agree. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and all the good work you've done in Tooele.
Have you found yourself in a position where you've got data in precarious positions? Do you worry about where your data goes? Are you having trouble corralling those third-party apps? And do you get blinded by contract provisions? Well, you guys should wait no more. Throw out all those old links that you've got, dust those cobwebs off, because what we have for you, ladies and gentlemen, are some new resources. I was going to go Oprah with this, but Oprah's so played out. And anyway, here we are. What we have for you is we have an updated website. We have a new hub for the Utah Student Privacy Alliance, which is this group by and large. It is how we connect nationally with those folks that I spend a lot of time with. We are known as the Utah Student Privacy Alliance. We're going to talk a little bit about listservs and road trips, and then some future things that we have and we will need your help with. So what we have here in this interactive website is our new website. USBE's website has been updated since around the first couple of weeks of January. If you do go to our spot on the website, what you'll find are all of these headings here on the left, from laws and policies, places for parents. That's where some of your educators or all of your educators can go to find information about the training that they need for relicensure as well. And then we've got all this other stuff. We've got stuff for the data managers. We've got stuff for the ISOs. We've got stuff for the appointed records officers. Remember, those folks are a part of our umbrella as well. Training resources, events, newsletters. Contact us. If you are not on our newsletter, that is where you can look that up and take advantage of all of the things that we send out. The listservs will be something that we'll talk about to do that. But, you know, that's a pretty good looking website. But guess what? We've got more. Oh, there's more. All right. So we've been working behind the scenes on a space. And those of you that know that we've got a lot of resources that have existed in a Google folder for quite some time. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to create a space that would tell the story of all of the documents that we've created. And so what we have here is the Utah Student Privacy Alliance homepage. So I'm going to reiterate, the USPA is a collaborative between us, the Student Data Privacy Team of the Utah State Board of Education, and the data managers of local LEAs. And we share this common concern for student privacy. So we work together, not as a punitive force, but as a force for good. What we have here is different sections that we have, and a lot of these are crosswalked with what's on our website. But with Canvas, this allows us to tell the story more to you, specifically as our audience, as opposed to the broader public. What you can see there, and if you have navigated to the website and are looking at it at the same time, each one of these drop downs has extra information. That USPA monthly meeting, as you can see, the next one is April 25th. In there, we put links to the meetings and all of the things from former meetings that we have talked about. Laws and policies. What is the process to obtain a data privacy agreement? Let's see here. You can take a look at that. We've got a 5-step program. We've got all these different types of data privacy agreements. Wow, you've been around for forever and you didn't know that we have a research one? That's behind door number 3. SDPC. We talked about Learn Platform, and Learn Platform is an amazing product and it helps everybody out. SDPC is one of our partners as well, and SDPC is designed somewhat specifically to meet the compliance of our law. So this is on Canvas. It is actually available on Canvas right now. You should be able to click on these and go to it. I will drop the link in the chat. It is also in the resource document as well. When annual privacy compliance review comes up, and we will be talking about that in a couple of weeks at the end of May 30th. This is where you can go to refresh your memory and walk through that. Newsletters, networking. I want all the people that are in this chat right now to know that when you all are together, that is when the best work happens. It's when you're having these conversations in the chat about, whoa, I didn't know that that thing was a thing, and you've already established some sort of a policy. Let's bring our brains together. This is what we want to do. We want to start planting seeds so we're all using the same verbiage. Okie dokie. And then you can schedule a meeting with Nicole and I. Take a deep breath. You're gonna vibes back. All right, listservs. Here is a wall of text. A lot of you do participate in listservs through TCC or C Forum, but a lot of you may not know that we have just created 2 different listservs. A listserv acts kind of like a message board where you can send an email out to the email address, and then that then goes to everybody else who are on that, that are registered for that. And then it allows you to collaboratively have conversations. One of the things that we like about this for us as a team is that it'll allow us to give you more prescriptive information on things as they come up, if their things are emergent or different types of things that we may need some information or feedback on. We're also, as I mentioned earlier, we're baking in a lot of this records management stuff. If you don't know who your appointed records officer is at your LEA, that should be somebody that you should make friends with. And if that's you, shake your own hand, because that's something that we really need to start baking into a lot of this with destruction of data, how long we keep things around. It's really important when we get into things like data breaches and other things. If you'd like to go in here, we can take a little bit more about that listserv. If you are not familiar with the TCC or the C Forum listserv, those are great resources. A lot of the folks in here are on that listserv. I see it was going this morning. And then there is also a repository of other listservs hosted by UEN. I've actually jumped on a couple of those just for the sake of getting updated information from those of you that are experts in those particular topics. You guys are all over the state. I feel this. I turned 46 on Monday. Old. Sometimes it's hard to get going, but we will come to you. Did you know that? We can come to you. And we've really been surprised at how much we've gotten out of our work with the regional service centers, SEDC. We had a nice little trip last February where we talked about records management. We had direct conversations with the front desk secretaries. And then next October, we're going to be working with SESC with some of the same population. South Summit wants us to come visit. San Juan wants us to come visit. Did you guys know? No, I'm not going to tell you the secret about the air. So bookmark these links, and then you can just set it and forget it. Just move on. That's what it's designed for. That USPA site is going to be a living place for us to have these conversations, for you to go. If you've got to voluntold this information off onto somebody else, you can say, here, sit down, take care. You can walk yourself through this. I've got to go work on other things. So that's really what we've set this up for, as a repository. We hope that you use it. We hope that you enjoy it. Some of the future things that we're looking at, like I said, Front Desk 411, that is for all of our front desk folks. They are the guardians of the gates. We're trying to give them training that goes across the board for all of us in the state, so that, when they jump in, they don't have to take 20 years to learn all of that information, and then they take it with them when they're gone. We talk about cumulative folders and SSIDs and birth certificates and all these things that are privacy related, but we also got to take care of all the record management. These folks are the most important folks in our agencies most of the time. And a lot of the time, they are also your AROs, appointed records officers, and they deal with records management. We have courses for both of these. What my ask is for you, if you have a rock star front desk person, I want to talk to them. I want to know who they are. I want to, I want to squeeze all of the information out of them so that we can make these spaces really comprehensive. The best way for these folks to learn about these jobs is for them to hear the stories and the scenarios from their peers. It's amazing how much we can learn through just the sharing and the networking that we're doing right now. So please send me your rock stars. If you have any questions about any of this, Miss Cleo would love to answer you. I'm just kidding. Privacy at schools.utah.gov is where you can find us. And if you order now, we will throw in the sounds of the 80s at no extra charge. You just have to pay shipping and handling. That's it. Jokes, jokes, jokes. And actually, ladies and gentlemen, I just got off of an email, and here's another surprise. Today, I have learned from SDPC that the NDPA version 2 is going through its final check. If it is approved today, they will be doing all of the other stuff that they need to do in the back end to have the NDPA 2 ready for release by the end of April, which means that we can talk about what that might look like for Utah May 30th when we're talking about next year. All right. I was born in 78, Robert. 4/15/78. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I'd like to pass it back over to my team. See you later.
All right, so welcome to this session, which is myth busting directory information. The student data privacy team sometimes hears misconceptions surrounding directory information. And these come even from people who are really well versed in data privacy. So it's sometimes kind of surprising. So we are going to walk through in this presentation some of the statements that we hear, and we'll determine which ones are true and which ones are false. And I encourage you to put on your intellectual humility hat because, again, some of these misconceptions come from people who are, in all other ways, data privacy experts. But there's something about directory information that has people, there's some strong misconceptions surrounding it. So we're excited to walk through this today. All right, so first we're gonna look at a little video, and actually I need to fix my share because I need to make it video friendly, but I just want to preface this by saying this is a video I made a couple years ago. It's not great. I think it's kind of fun. I think it's informational, but there's actually like a couple little, like it says that FERPA was passed in 1976, which is not true. It was 1974. And it's also like pretty rough around the edges. So I'm not showing you this necessarily because I'm terribly proud of it, but I do think it's a helpful video. Let me fix my share so that it's good for video. Okay, and you're seeing my, if you can hear this, okay.
Directory information.
Are we good?
Yeah, we hear it, Katie.
Okay, all right, here we go.
Here's a totally made up, totally not true story of how I imagined directory information coming to be. 100 years ago, in 1976, some people wrote FERPA, and when they introduced the first draft of the bill, it said, you can only share student information if you have parent permission, no battle. And then all these educators read that draft of the bill, and they were all like, what? We need to express our concerns. So they all went to Washington. And the teachers were like, your bill says educators can only share student information if we have parent permission, no battle. Are you saying I have to get parent permission to share any student information? What about yearbooks? What about sports rosters? What about local newspapers? What about student directories? See that? That's where the name directory information came from. And then the people who wrote FERPA were all like, oh yeah, sorry. Let's make a thing called directory information, and that way you can share all that stuff. And the educators were like, and can we choose what information we want to designate as directory information? And the FERPA authors were like, sure, just make sure to notify parents each year. And the educators were like, sweet. And then they left. So the people made changes and put out another draft. But then all these parents saw the change in the FERPA bill and they were all like, what? We need to talk to these guys about our concerns. So they went to Washington. And then these parents were all like, we're worried about this whole directory information thing. I mean, what if I need to keep my family's identity secret because my kids are at risk of kidnapping by a family member, or I just don't want my students' information posted publicly? And the people who wrote FERPA were all like, oh yeah, good point. That is a super serious concern. Let's allow parents to opt out if they want to. And the parents were like, cool, we're good with that. And they left. And that's how directory information was born, along with the directory information opt-out. So here are the takeaways. Each year, you need to give parents notice of what you designate as directory information and give them the opportunity to opt out. You need to keep track of who has opted out, and when you want to share, publicize, or post student information that your district has designated as directory information, you must remove information of students who have been opted out. The end.
All right. Hopefully you found that video useful. I kind of
Directory
crack myself
information.
up sometimes,
Here's a-
so I was sort of smiling while we were watching. Okay. All right. Oh, Doug says, what about letting our employees have the ability to opt out of sharing their directory information? Yeah, that would be rad. Except grandma doesn't really allow for that. So I'm sorry, Doug. Okay. All right. So, and which we will like a very sort of address a little bit later. So we're going to do an activity now. If you would like, you can find a scratch piece of paper and a pencil or pen. And Colleen said she stayed awake for the whole video. That is great. I'm going to walk you through a bunch of different statements. Your task is to decide if you think this statement is true or false. And there are some true and there are some false. So it's originally my presentation only had false statements and my team wisely recommended that I include some true ones. So, and then after you've had a chance to reflect, then I'll tell you the correct answer and explain. So here we go. Your first statement, and this one is extremely text heavy. They won't all be this way, I promise. But your first statement to consider, true or false, directory information includes the following. So take a minute to read through this. And again, the question is this statement true or false? I'll give you a minute to read it. And you're welcome to type in the chat what you think, but you don't have to, just if that would be fun for you. Okay, a couple more seconds. All right, here we go. This one is sometimes true. Here's the explanation for you. All of this information that I've listed on the screen here is information that can be considered directory information under FERPA. However, it is not safe to assume that all schools consider it directory information because each school or LEA gets to decide. And a couple of years ago, we went through, based on your directory information notices, we went through a bunch of them and kind of made note about what different LEAs consider to be directory information. And it is definitely not the case that everyone considers this to be directory information. We have a lot of schools that have only 2 or 3 data elements that they consider to be directory information. So it's not safe to say that all of these are necessarily directory information. Your school gets to choose. And then if you're not sure what you're currently considering to be directory information, you can check your directory information notice, which might be included in your annual notice of FERPA rights. Okay, statement number 2. Make your decision, true or false. If it's directory information, it is not personally identifiable information. take a second to think about it. Again, you can type it in the chat or write it down. The answer is false. This is a strong misconception that we sometimes hear. People think it's not PII because it's directory information. The truth is that directory information is PII that is also considered directory information. So here's some examples: a student's name, address, parent name, their student statewide identifier, fingerprint, and so on. These are PII, all of these are, and a few of them may be designated as directory information. So it's not one or the other. All right, here's your next statement. True or false? LEAs, local education agencies, districts, and charters can share any directory information for any student with any person for any reason. True or false? The answer is false. Here's the truth. One of the very most important parts of directory information that people don't talk about nearly enough, in my opinion, is the opt-out element. So it might be true that you can share directory information. You know, you have a lot of flexibility in with who you share directory information, but you always need to check for opt-outs. Always, always, always. Also, your policy can vary. So there is this thing called a limited directory information policy, which means that rather than just a blanket statement that, you know, your LEA may share directory information, you know, the following information, whatever. Some LEAs have a policy in place that limits that. So in other words, you might say, you might have a policy that says, oh, we might share student photos, but only on social media or only in the yearbook. So you can place limitations on how you share directory information. So you'll need to check your policy to see where you're at on that. Let's see, I'm just trying to see where I'm at on time. Okay, we're doing good. All right, next one, true or false? Typically, choosing not to share directory information, what? That is weirdly worded. Typically, choosing not to share directory information is done by a parent actively opting out versus opting in. So put another way, how do parents indicate that they don't want their directory information shared? Do they do this via opting out or opting in? If it's opting out, then your answer should be true. Okay, here we go. The answer is true. So the directory information exception under FERPA requires that parents be given an opportunity to opt out. This puts the onus on the parent. So they would need to, you know, in some cases, perhaps call or email the school. Well, it has to be in writing. So they would maybe need to like email the school and say, hey, I want you to not share my students' directory information. Or some LEAs have a form that the parent would need to fill out. This could also be done through the registration process. I know Aspire has like a little box, I think, that parents can check to indicate whether they want their directory information to be shared. The way it's written in FERPA, though, is what I'm getting at is that it's an opt-out, not an opt-in. However, there's nothing in FERPA that says that a school can't make it an opt-in if they want to. Opt-in means that the default is to not share unless the parent has indicated that they want it to be shared. Okay, true or false? Directory information is public information. LEAs have an obligation to share directory information with someone who requests it for anyone who has not opted out. True or false? The answer is false. This is a really strong misconception that I sometimes hear. The answer is that FERPA allows schools to share directory information, but it does not compel them to. You at your school, you maintain the discretion to share, to determine whether you want to share or not. And I think, you know, from what I understand from LEAs, a lot of LEAs are very particular about who they share directory information with. There is one little exception here, which is that military recruiters, upon request, you are required to provide them certain information for students who are in grades 11 or 12, unless the parent has opted out. And then you're also tied to that is sorry, I keep looking over the chat. Institutions of higher education, but otherwise it's your choice. You get to choose. I'll note, and this comes back to was Doug's question about employee data, for example. This is different from GRAMA because GRAMA makes some disclosing some information required. So there is information that GRAMA requires you to share. For example, certain employee information must be made available to a requester. But that's not the case for student information. That's specifically written out of GRAMA. All right, your next statement is true or false. One common use of the directory information exception is to post student photos and names in a yearbook. You can write it down on your piece of paper if you'd like. And the answer is true. This is one of the most common reasons or ways that the directory information exception is utilized. So the as always, though, like when you're putting together your yearbook, you need to check your policy to make sure that it's permitted, because an LEA does have the right to, restrict the use of directory information, and make sure that you're not including students who have opted out. Next statement, true or false? The directory information exception is a good exception to justify providing student information to an EdTech product. This one is false, pretty much. So this, I feel like, well, I won't get into that, but let's talk about why this is pretty much false. Technically, there's nothing in FERPA that says that you can't share, directory information with an EdTech provider. But there are many problems with this. First is that the assumption would be that you've removed the names of students who have opted out. So like if you want your students to use a certain product, we'll call it SuperLearn, which is John's imaginary EdTech product. If you want your students to use SuperLearn and you're going to justify sharing that information with SuperLearn under the directory information exception, that means that there's going to be kids at your school who aren't allowed to use SuperLearn because their parents have opted them out of directory information sharing. So that's a failing in the first place. And then also it almost certainly doesn't match what was communicated to parents in your directory information notice. So it wouldn't really be honoring what you explained to them. Plus, you still have to meet the contract requirements of Utah's law. So even if you were to justify it according to the directory information exception. Okay, true or false? If my LEA or an EdTech vendor experiences an incident in which directory information is exposed, only directory information is exposed, it's not considered a data breach. Go ahead and write your answer on your paper, true or false. And the answer is false. The explanation for this is that breaches are all about whether the disclosure of information was unauthorized or unintentional. It's less about whether the breach was, benign information. It's more about, did it happen on accident? So you can share directory information on purpose, and that might not be a breach. But if someone obtained information that you consider directory information in an unauthorized way, that still likely constitutes a breach. I will note that the definition of what constitutes a data breach is like a little bit nuanced, and it's specific to each state. So we have for education records, we have in Utah a definition in our board rule, and then the Utah Cyber Center also has a definition for what constitutes a breach under their definition. But neither of those have an exemption for directory information, for example. All right, the next one, this might be our last one. USBE, true or false, USBE can share directory information on behalf of LEAs. False. Sorry, I didn't give you much time on that one. The explanation is this: USBE does not have information about which students have been opted out. So we sometimes get requests for this, and people are like, well, can't you share it? It's directory information. And we say no, because we don't know which students have been opted out, so it wouldn't be appropriate for us to share. Also, again, every LEA gets to designate what they designate as, they get to choose what they designate as director information. And some LEAs have limited directory information policies, meaning that even if they share directory information, it can only be for certain purposes. How am I doing on time? Okay, great. We're doing okay. Oh, thank you. Melissa just gave me a 5-minute warning. Thanks, Melissa. All right, so here's the section that I really enjoy. This is my Katie's recommendations section. So everything I just told you previously was sort of like a legal analysis of what FERPA says. But these next couple slides are me encouraging you to just kind of shift your mindset a little bit about directory information. But they're not necessarily the law per se. So I pretty regularly, I used to hear this when I was, teaching or when I worked at the district, and I continue to hear it now from people where people will say things like, it's okay, it's directory information. Which, again, technically might be true, but I would encourage you to shift your mindset from viewing directory information as an excuse for data sharing and instead start viewing it through the lens of making it an opportunity, and you disclose information by choice when it provides students and families with a desired experience. So some classic examples of this are a playbill. Having a student's name listed in their playbill, assuming the student has not been opted out, is a great way to recognize the student. The parents like it, the students like it. It's not an excuse, it's an opportunity. Another example is a yearbook. Yearbooks are a really important part of the school culture for most students and families. Parents want it, students want it. Another option is school directories. This is especially common, I think. I had one of these in high school, so it's like a cool way to like have friends' phone numbers. And I know a lot of charter schools, this is especially important to them because they want parents to be able to arrange carpools. And, some elementary school kids, like the parents want to arrange play dates. So again, that is something that parents and students want. And finally, another example is sports rosters. So being able to recognize students for the sports that they're playing, that kind of thing. Again, shifting that mindset from an excuse to an opportunity if the parents and students, for something that parents and students want. And then to wrap up, I have a couple more recommendations. I encourage you to ask yourself, is your LEA honoring what is communicated in your directory information notice? In your directory information notice, it usually has a couple of little examples of the ways, the reasons that you might be sharing directory information. If you look through your notice and you're like, oh, we're sharing information in a way that is more expansive than what we're saying in our notice, then I encourage you to either adjust your sharing or update your notice to build family trust and to honor what you're communicating to parents. And the second thing that I encourage you to ask yourself is, big letters, are you checking for opt-outs? Again, that's a really important piece of the directory information exception, and it's one that people often don't talk about. So that should always be in the back of your mind. Every time you talk about directory information, ask yourself, are you checking for opt-outs? In closing, I encourage you to indicate in the chat if this presentation confirmed your current understanding, you can type an A. If it updated your understanding a little bit, you can type a B. If it significantly updated your understanding, you can type C. Also, feel free to state specifically what you learned. You also don't have to type anything if you don't want to. It's just your choice.
Also, Katie, Kate in the chat did have a question. Kate York.
Okay, I'm looking at it now. So the question is, displaying student work on bulletin boards and in the hallways, when is this considered a violation of FERPA? When the grades are on it? Asking because a lot of schools in my area send student artwork to public library with their names and class info. Okay, that's a great question. And I have a few different ways to approach this. The first is, anytime you get parent consent for something, that's like the golden standard. So if posting student work, especially to your question about like sending the artwork to the public library, if there's some if there's some level of parents granting consent in that process, then you're good to go. Parents can always have the right to say what they're comfortable with. If you're sending art to the public library with the names and class information, that could, that's probably allowable under the directory information exception. If your school has designated name and class information as directory information, and if you've checked for opt-outs. I think the ideal way to do it would be to just not include names or class information. And then back to your very first part of your question, Kate, where you ask about, well, what about within the bulletin boards in the hallways? And yes, that is the Supreme Court actually kind of weighed in on this in an interesting ruling, and they said that that's okay to display student work in the hallway, but yeah, you wouldn't want to have grades on it. And hopefully that answered your question. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of B's and some C's, a couple A's. Very cool. Oh, Kathy loved the video. That's great news. Nicole asks, is it directory information if a school releases names and emails for students who only meet certain criteria? For example, I am requesting school for every student. Oh, yeah. So Nicole, this is a great question. So if the directory information is accompanied by some other qualifier, like this is an extreme example, but please give me the directory information for all students who have a disability, then you've basically tacked on another data element to that list. And so that would no longer be a directory, that would no longer be directory information. So the example that you gave, Nicole, yeah, that would not be directory information. And then also I just encourage you again to look at it through the lens of you're not obligated to share. Like you maintain the discretion. If it's not good for kids and families, then it's probably not something you want to do.
Alrighty, yeah, we're doing data privacy amendments. So this is beefy. The other one's a little smaller, but let's face it, all bills are kind of long. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Anyway, so we're talking about data privacy amendments, Jeremy and I. And this one is a really big bill. It is still amendments. And I just want to talk about some of the themes we were seeing as we were reviewing the bill and the requirements. So we're seeing a lot about employee training and trainings around privacy for employees at LEAs. And we're seeing a lot of things that we already are doing for student data, but expanding that to anybody whose personal data is collected or stored at schools or LEAs. So that's that theme. Those themes are going to come up, and you'll see that. And then once again with this kind of review that we're doing with bills, and this is true, I think, of any of the bills we're covering today, we encourage you to kind of dig in and look at them yourself. We're really giving a very, very high level overview and trying to give you, from a data privacy perspective, what we feel is most important, but there's a lot of other perspective on these bills and other requirements we might not specifically talk about because they don't have to do with data privacy. So always encourage to look at it yourself and also reach out with questions at any point. So with that said, I'm going to jump in and cover my slides. So hopefully, I know Jeremy and my coworkers are going to check the chat for me and stuff, and feel free to jump in and stop me if people have questions. So this first requirement we're covering in this bill is a new annual report about data sharing and selling. So there is a new requirement that LEAs must report annually to the state privacy officer. Our current state privacy officer is Whitney Phillips. And in this report, we at least know at a minimum that Whitney would like to see the types of personal data that an LEA shares. And technically it talks about selling, but most LEAs aren't going to be selling data, hopefully. The basis for sharing the personal data and who receives the personal data from the LEA. So this is a brand new requirement. There's, I'm sure you guys have questions about what medium do they want this report in? When do they want it? What should it include? Will they require more than what is listed in the bill? So we've been in contact with Whitney about this, or at least Katie has, and Whitney will be reaching out or informing we'll be informing everybody what she would like to see and how she would like to obtain it. And she did suggest that she might want more included in the report than just the minimum requirements. So she's really the one who's going to be making that determination of what she wants in this report. So that's kind of the information I just have to pass on to you today. With each of these requirements, we try to parse them out and decide, what kind of action items do LEAs need to know about. So on these pink boxes on the side where it says action, we have upon request. So when we're saying that, when Whitney says, hey guys, it's go time. Upon request, create an annual report which contains the required personal data sharing information. And it would probably benefit LEAs in preparation for this required report. Take an inventory of employee data. What kind of systems are you keeping that data in? We often think about HR systems when we're thinking about that. And ensure your MDD is current and comprehensive, because at least from a student data perspective, your MDD might cover some of these requirements already. Okay, so I see stuff coming in the chat, but it looks like Katie and others are covering it, so thank you guys. But if there's something I need to address, let me know. So the second requirement that I'm covering is a data collection notice. So the bill talks about how LEAs must provide a personal data request notice to individuals or guardians of individuals for students it requests or collects data from. And this notice must include the reason for the collection, the intended purpose or purposes, the consequences of refusing to provide the data, if there are any, where the data is coming from and where it will go, and the record series the data belongs in, if applicable. So when we talk about record series, we're talking about like retention and determining what type of record you have, so you can figure out how long you need to retain it, or if you need to destroy it. So you likely already have some type of data collection notice, especially for students, but you'll just want to review what you have versus what you might need to fulfill this requirement. So the only action will be create or update a data collection notice that includes the required information in this bill. And we have a requirement to make sure you have some kind of process for amending or correcting data. So when you hear this, if you're familiar with FERPA, it might ring some bells, because FERPA already requires, so, in its own way, it requires a process like this for student data. But as I was mentioning at the beginning, there's this theme of kind of taking requirements we already do with student data and widening them to anybody with personal data stored. So LEAs that collect personal data must provide a procedure that allows individuals or legal guardians to request an amendment or correction to their personal data. An LEA is not obligated to make any requested amendments or corrections submitted using the procedure. They just have to have the procedure in place to accept a request. They don't always have to actually follow through with the request. So ensure that any existing processes you have for amendments or corrections to data, that not just guardians requesting amendments for student data, that an employee of your school could also amend or correct data that the school is storing on them. So I kind of like that one because at least it's already something in place, or there's already things around that for student data. We're just kind of widening that. And then I think this is my final slide for this presentation. In the bill, it talks about the requirement to retain and dispose of data, which, I mean, this is already a requirement. We have retention rules around our data, but it is in this bill as well. LEAs must retain and dispose of personal data in accordance with record retention schedules. The schedules themselves haven't changed any more than that naturally has changed. This bill didn't change any schedules is what I'm saying. So we can still use the resources that we've always used around retention. Our own John Lyman created the Utah RAMP, which is a wonderful resource about retention schedules for education records specifically. So it's really, really helpful. There's a couple parts of that need to be updated, but for the most part, it's pretty good. And then if you do have questions around, hey, I don't know if this schedule on the ramp is 100% accurate anymore, you can cross-reference with the State Archives website, because the State Archives website is always up to date. And you can search that for any retention schedule for any type of record. And it's a pretty cool website. I've been using it and for my projects, and I've really enjoyed it. So as you probably already have been doing, just ensure that personal data records are being retained and disposed of according to retention schedules. And John has some great Canvas courses linked, I believe, in our resource document around record retention, which can provide a lot more information on that if you need it. All right, so this is where I will jump off and Jeremy can step in and present his portion.
Thanks, Melissa, and hello, everyone. So between May of this year and no later than January 2027, you're required to review your privacy practices, document any that are non-compliant, compliance meaning that you're doing the things mentioned in this presentation, and create a strategy to correct any issues. Furthermore, the bill specifically calls out data minimization, so collecting and storing only data that is absolutely necessary. So keep that in mind as you work through your current practices. Next slide, please. Maybe. Thank you. You're also required to implement and maintain a privacy program before May 2025 that includes policies, practices, and procedures for processing personal data. What specifically will that look like? We can help you. Over the coming months, we intend to provide additional webinars, trainings, and resources for you. As Katie mentioned earlier, or maybe she didn't, but privacy is our full-time job, and we want to make sure that y'all are supported as you work through compliance with this new bill. Yeah, next slide, please. The newly formed Privacy Commission will create a training that must be completed by anyone who deals with data. We also intend to create a training that aligns to theirs, but is more education-centric, so either will work. New employees must take the training within 30 days of being hired, and all other employees once a year. You'll also have to track the completion of that training. Further, the bill notes that the provisions in this presentation extend to contractors. So those of you who have contracted substitutes, coaches, etc., you'll need to provide training to them as well if they deal with data. A literal interpretation of that line is that the provisions would extend to vendors too, but I'm not really sure how we're going to get like Lexia and Google or others to take our trainings. Employees that don't deal with data are exempt from the training. Next slide, please. HB 491 also modifies existing data breach notice requirements. To first recap what is the same though, 1344-202 created the requirement that entities notify the Utah Cyber Center and Attorney General within 5 days of a data breach affecting 500 more individuals. I've included a link to that form on this slide, as well as the relevant legislation. And also I'd like to remind you that data breaches affecting student data must be reported to our team within 10 days per board rule. And to the degree appropriate, I'm also always willing to assist however possible if y'all experience an incident. And one last little note is that cybercrime should also be reported to the FBI through the IC3 website, which I've included a link to here in that tiny orange bubble. So make sure that your incident response process is robust and involves contacting the Utah Cyber Center and us as necessary. Next slide, please. The Cyber Center report should include date and time the incident occurred and was discovered, the means by which access was granted, who did it, steps you've taken to remediate, number of affected individuals, with a specific call out to Utah individuals, the type of data disclosed, and anything else that the Cyber Center requests. Next slide, please. Unless it would pose a threat to someone's safety, notice must be sent to the affected individuals after restoring reasonable integrity. That notice should include a description of the breach or incident, the individual's affected personal data, steps you're taking to respond, and recommendations to prevent identity theft. So make sure that you're factoring those notifications into your incident response plans. Next slide, please. And unless they've given preference to the type of communication that they want to receive, the notice must be given in two forms. Email or mail is available, and a text message or phone call. The text message should include a link to the full details of the incident. A public notice also has to be posted, such as a press release or on social media or in a newspaper. And if no other means of communication is available, a public notice that's like reasonably viewable is sufficient. Next slide, please. One change to that process from HB 491 is that any incident involving personal data must be logged with an internal incident report and reported annually to the Cyber Center. And that truly is any incident. So a great example being like a teacher who sends an email with every parent in the CC line instead of BCC. If it involves unauthorized access, misuse, or disclosure of personal data, it has to be logged. When I was at a charter school, I logged and took very detailed notes anytime there was a lapse in privacy or security, no matter how small. But being in a charter, I had the luxury of being an IT admin and a school tech. For those of you in districts, managing this requirement may be much more difficult. You'll have to work with your school techs and admin to make sure that you're being informed whenever these incidents occur. Next slide, please. I see a question in the chat. Who is the Cyber Center? The Utah Cyber Center, I don't remember when they were created, but they exist to assist Utah entities, like governmental entities, with incident response and also to provide training and resources. And per the legislation, they're the people that you have to report to if there is any sort of a data breach or incident. And yeah, Katie just posted the link in the chat. Again, we couldn't cover every single thing in this bill, so we want to leave you with some contacts. Whitney and Nora both work at the Office of the State Auditor, and they're great resources if you want to schedule a privacy health check or have questions about this bill. Chris Bramwell is the Chief Privacy Officer of the newly formed Office of Data Privacy. So I'm sure he's available too. Next slide, please. But of course, we are available whenever you have any questions or comments, no matter how small. So please reach out and please take a look at the bill yourself, as we've said a million times now, because it was quite large. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned earlier, we're not going to leave y'all hanging on this. We'll work to support you in the coming months with additional trainings and resources. Thankfully, and thanks to all of you, our state is very mature when it comes to student data privacy. This bill just extends many of those practices to other types of personal data, like employees. But even then, it'll still be a big lift when y'all have so much else to do. So we're here to help. And that's all I've got. Thank you. If there are any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Otherwise, yeah, that's it.
So the next presentation is just me. I only have, I think, 7 slides of content for this, so it is another really quick overview of a bill. I'm going to be talking about the school safety amendments. So once again, amendments to an existing bill that already had a lot around school safety. I mean, this bill includes not only like, we're talking more about like student data privacy, safety, and data that we store digitally a lot. But this bill includes a lot about like physical safety of a school campus. So that's probably why it's so big, is it's kind of including all aspects of safety. So I'm just going to be covering, once again, just the highlights that we saw as a data privacy group from that lens. There's lots of other stuff in here that, I mean, I've read the bill, so if you have questions about that, I'll do my best to answer. And if I can't find those answers right away, we can always follow up, or I can direct you to somebody on our school safety team that would probably better answer those types of questions. All right, so one of the biggies that we saw for student privacy in this bill was it now requires that school resource officers, as part of your contract that you have with them, that they be designated as school officials in reference to FERPA. So most of you are probably familiar. FERPA has an exception, we usually call it the school officials exception, where if you have somebody designated as a school official, that person can access student information using that exception. So all that's to say, if we are now requiring school resource officers to be designated as a school official, they will have that exception, and they will be able to access that student data with that exception if it arises. So if that situation arises. So this is, a straight up requirement, action, designate SROs as a school official in your LEA documentation. And then in your annual notice of FERPA rights, you likely already have a list of who is generally considered a school official. So you'll want to include SROs on that designation as well. So, people reading that notice are aware of that. And it would be recommended that you're making clear that anybody marked as a school official has that exception applied to them in FERPA. So that was a biggie for us. The other one that, I've heard floating around a lot, and I'm sure many of you are aware of, and Katie brought up in her first presentation today, is a requirement around early warning systems. In the bill, it talks about them being early warning programs. Those are the same thing. So there is now a requirement for all LEAs to have an early warning system or program that has the ability to identify students in need of intervention based on certain criteria. Yeah, so that's the requirement now. There are quite a few LEAs that are already using some type of early warning system, and this requirement now just extends it, so all LEAs need to be using some type of system. So the actions include, if your LEA does not already have a digital program that acts as an early warning system, it needs to work on acquiring one. There is also written into the bill that USBE will help pay for half of the cost of any system. Ensure that parents have the option to opt in students of any survey prepared by your LEA's early warning system / program. So Katie covered that in the survey bill that she did when we started. So those two things overlap between these two bills. So that's why I mentioned as stated in HB 182. And report to USBE on the effectiveness of your early warning system after using it for no later than 1 school year. So in terms of, somebody earlier today asked about, like, when do we have to implement this? I couldn't find a specific due date for the early warning program itself. I can tell you that this section of the bill is effective 5/1/24. So I didn't see a specific due date for the early warning system itself. The section is in, becomes effective 5/1/24. The thing about this requirement is the way it is worded in the bill. It actually says like USBE is required to ensure that LEAs have access to an early warning program. So the way it is written, is almost like putting the responsibility on USBE to ensure that you guys have access to one. So I think that's partly why there's not a strict due date for LEAs, if that makes sense. If you look at the bill itself and the requirements, that wording and kind of what I'm saying might make a little more sense. So here are the lines in the bill, 1425, 1435, and right around there, that's where you're gonna find the actual verbatim wording for this requirement, which I always encourage people to check because I'm simplifying it, right? I'm saying this is the requirement, and at the end of the day, that is the requirement, but there are nuances here. So I encourage you to check that out. Did not see a due date specifically for the early warning program, but the bill is going to soon be in effect. So that's what I can tell you in terms of like dates and requirements to get this done. So I have a couple more things here. We kind of got through the biggies, but we have a requirement around action plans. So there are already requirements around creating action plans, but this is more just notifying parents of action plans. So in addition to notifying parents of incidents or threats, of incidents or threats, LEAs must share the action plan that will address the incident if one is being made. So just adding that to any kind of notification to parents about specific situations, making sure that action plans are also communicated.
Melissa?
Mm-hmm.
A question came in the chat about putting together, it says, I recall being told that USBE was putting together an RFP for an early warning system. And I just wanted to confirm that that is my understanding as well, that then I don't know when that process will, I imagine in the coming months, that process will take place. So do you have, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but I just wanted to say that verbally.
Yeah, I think go with what Katie just said. That's kind of what I've heard as well. I think we've all heard the same thing, and so that's what I'm gonna go off of. But I haven't heard any more confirming evidence around that yet.
And what, sorry, one more question that just came in. Is the action plan, so I think what you referred to on that last slide, is that referring to data breach issues?
No, so I think there is confusion because when we talk about data breaches, we talk about action plans. So what I was talking about was more if a student experiences bullying at school and it's identified as a bullying incident, you know, the bully and the student being bullied are both kind of talked to, and it's a situation that required some kind of action plan to be made around how are they going to move forward to hopefully prevent any further bullying. So that when I say action plan, that's the action plan I'm talking about. Action plans that we apply to situations with students. So in this instance, no, I'm not talking about data breaches. And if you look at the bill, it goes through like when do we need action plans and what situations do we need to make them in? And that's what that's the language the bill uses, and that's why I say it, but I understand why it could be confusing. But simple answer your question, no, I was talking about a different kind of action plan. So hopefully that answers your question. All righty. So we have this a couple more slides. So this part, Katie and I went back and forth if we were going to include this. So this is not something you need to do anything about right now, but there's a line in the bill that talks about establishing integrations between USBE data systems and a public data portal that is managed by the Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice. So the way it's written, it's a data exchange between USBE and essentially CCJH. But we get most of our student data at USBE from LEAs. So there could be implications down the road for LEA data systems around this type of data. But we don't know yet, there's nothing written in this bill specifically stating that. So just want to give a heads up for that.
Melissa, another question just came in. What exactly is the early warning system for? Is it a camera system that can tell if a student is going to do harm, or is it for mental health?
No. So although there are requirements around camera systems and other physical campus safety systems in this bill, what I'm talking about with an early warning system is a digital system, and it's all like, I guess it is a separate application from what I've talked with Katie and others, and you can correct me, Katie, because you probably know more about what that looks like. But it's an application that can collect student data, and then it's designed to be able to look at that data and look for certain behavior or markers that would suggest the student may need an intervention. So, for example, I think one of the suggested markers is attendance. If the student isn't attending school for a significant amount of time, that can be concerning. So the system can pick up on that and say, hey, the student hasn't been going to school. They maybe be getting a higher rate of incidents happening with them, getting sent to the office more often, those types of things. I would like to, as the application, would like to suggest to you that the student could be at risk, and I would suggest you perform an intervention and just talk to them and see what's going on. So I'm talking about a digital system, and the bill kind of refers to it in that way. It's like a digital system that can do this, which is kind of why I've been trying to use the correct language, because we keep talking about an early warning system and we don't really define, we just keep using that term and we don't really talk about what that means. But the bill is really good about talking about what that means. So hopefully that answered that question. Around, it's not a camera system that's it's nothing to do with the cameras or anything like that. An early warning system that we're talking about in this instance is a digital data gathering and analysis system, essentially.
Melissa, this is Katie again.
Mhm.
I think your explanation was spot on. I'll just add that I think my understanding is that these typically integrate with a student information system. That's where, and it's sort of like provides an avenue for using the data that might be in a student information system and formatting it in a way that helps school leaders and educators make, identify students who are in need of extra supports. And Robert asks, is each LEA sets the thresholds? This can be a big challenge. My memory is, Melissa, that it directs USBE to identify that what qualifiers, I guess, would constitute something to engage with a student. Is that right? Oh yeah, okay, she's got it here.
Yeah, so the bill lists and once again, you're right, Katie. It kind of talks about it through the lens of like USBE has the responsibility to ensure that LEAs have. So yeah, so that's where that's coming from. But it does list the criteria, but also kind of leaves it open. So the criteria that it lists in the bill is discipline, including school safety violations, attendance, behavior, course failures, and anything else the board determines. So in terms of like what we're looking at, it sounds like the board is going to determine that. But I guess in terms of like how many missed absences or like the thresholds per criteria, I'm not sure on that. I would assume the board would also determine that, but not sure. And it sounds like in the chat there's a good experience example talking about what they're doing. Okay. All right, I'm gonna continue if we feel good about those questions. Only a couple more slides. Yeah, and so I just have my closing slides essentially. So we've already said with the other bills, encourage you to take a look, especially for these parts that you have questions about or might have more concerns over. That's why I tried to put the line numbers so you could just specifically look at those lines or around those lines for the things that I was talking about today. Really high level overview. There's a lot of other things in this bill around physical campus requirements. There's requirements around having kind of like a sweep of the campus, and they'll be checking for specific requirements when they do that. So that was a big part of the bill, as well as the school guardian program is a brand new thing. And that's not a required program, my understanding, but if you want to participate in that, there's a lot of information about that as well. So just a lot of things in this bill that I would suggest taking a look at it. So that's all I had for this one for today. Like I said, we're always happy to take questions. If the person you're asking doesn't know, I already know whoever it is, they're going to do their darnest to find an answer for you from somebody who does. This bill and others where we have a lot of questions and discussion, our listserv is a great resource for that discussion as well.
Mostly, I just wanted to point you to two resources. So first is this guy. Our team put together, well, actually, I'll start with this resource on the right, this public education summary. This is an amazing resource. There are, dozens of USB staff members that work tirelessly to put this together every year after the legislative session ends. So I just wanted to point you to this. So basically what they do is, They identify bills that have an impact on K-12 education, public education. And they put together this, beautiful PDF that kind of helps people like you understand what bills have passed in the most recent legislative session. So for example, this page has a quick guide to some funding increases, which is always of interest. Here's some information about appropriation. There are always a few sections about or a few bills that we know are going to be especially of interest to LEAs that are included here. They have their own page. The bill that Melissa just talked about is one of those. Let's see, where is it? School safety amendment. So it has its own page. And then there's a section way down here. Oops, I'm sorry. House bills passed and Senate bills passed. This is an amazing resource that I really encourage you to check out. It has every bill, again, that we have identified as having implications for LEAs or USBE. It gives a brief bill summary. And this is the part that I think is most powerful. It tells USBE what we need to do, but also tells LEAs what you guys need to do. So I encourage you to use this as a resource if you want. Again, we tried to pull out the bills that we felt were specific to data privacy or data more broadly, but I wanted to make you aware of this really, really valuable resource. And it also includes at the bottom of every one of these, it tells you which USB staff members you can reach out to if you have questions. So that's resource number one. Resource number two is kind of our own little baby version of that resource. So we've gone through and identified, I want to say there's maybe 10 bills or so that, however many that is, that we felt had either direct or indirect implications for data privacy. And we threw those in here. So we've identified the key points of each bill that is of relevance, as well as action that we've identified as being required by LEAs. In a lot of cases, this very closely mirrors the language in that other resource I showed you, but in some cases, we've taken the liberty to kind of flesh out this a little bit more thoroughly. So you might want to look at both that other document and this one. We've broken it down by the four primary bills that we felt were most impactful to you as LEAs this year from a privacy perspective. You'll notice that these first three are the ones that we talked about today. And this one I will talk about ever so briefly in just a moment. All of these other ones have only sort of like tangential impact, but are probably still good to be made aware of. For example, this Children's Device Protection Act is an interesting one. It requires a manufacturer of a tablet or smartphone to automatically enable a filter on the device. The goal is to protect the students from social media harms. So the action we identified is mostly just for your awareness. And then also just making technology directors aware that you may need to disable pre-shipped filters on devices before installing your own. So that's an example of these sort of like tangentially related bills. Before we close, I'll just point you to the only key bill that we didn't really talk about today. And I didn't make a separate presentation for this because one of the slides that Jeremy went over in his presentation covers a lot of this, but I'll just mention it briefly. You may remember that last year there was a bill, I want to say it was like SB 65 or something like that, that created the Utah Cyber Center. And it had this provision in place that said, hey, you guys can't use .org domains anymore. Every government entity, including school districts, is supposed to have either a .gov or a .edu domain. And immediately people were like, that's not possible because the people who manage the .edu domains only allow them for higher education. So there were lots of conversations that took place over the past year. And so this year, the sponsor changed the bill and said, okay, we're going to continue to allow LEAs to use .org domains until the opportunity becomes available, which I would argue is likely not, like that may never happen. They're hopeful it will happen, but it might not, because we don't really have control over it. So in the interim, you're good to go with your .org domains if you have one. And then also just note that again, last year, the bill established the Utah Cyber Center and put in place some data breach reporting requirements, specifically, like Jeremy mentioned, a requirement to report data breaches that affected 500 or more Utah citizens. That data breach reporting requirement remains in place, but this year, this bill added a little bit more specificity, like they want information about what action was taken and that kind of thing. So just a heads up on that. And the resulting action is that you'll probably want to update your policies and procedures, including your incident response plans, to reflect those new data breach reporting requirements. Do we have any questions in the chat about anything that I've said so far? Okay.
Not yet, no.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I will tell you what, people, that is the end of my presentation. So this, in closing, we have a list of stuff to do, and we have a list of stuff to know. So we'll start with stuff to know. We want you to know that the recordings of these presentations will be posted on YouTube. John will work his magic and get those put up there, and I would imagine in the coming weeks. And when they're ready, we'll share them out via the newsletter and the new listserv, which hopefully you have all registered for by now. Jeremy, can I ask that you throw the links to those listservs in the chat again? We want to get as many people signed up as possible.
Yeah, for sure.
Really valuable. Thank you so much. Another thing to know is that as soon as we're done here recording, we're going to, myself and the team are going to stick around, and we'll change the settings so that you can come off mute at that point if you'd like, and we can have some, question answer if anyone has anything they want to ask us. The stuff to do, there's 4 things. First is please complete the post-training survey. And I wonder, Jeremy, if you could please throw that link into the chat as well, the survey. I know surveys are a pain, but we rely very heavily on your responses here to help us know how to improve, how to do trainings better the next time, what to do the same the next time. So please, please, please fill out that survey. It should take you about 5 minutes. We also encourage you to register for the Intro to the Privacy Compliance Review webinar. This is a webinar where John, Nicole, and Jeremy will give you information about what to expect in next year's Privacy Compliance Review, which will be due in November. And then also encourage you to sign up for the Privacy Listserv, and if applicable, sign up for the K-12 Records Listserv. This one is for records officers in particular. And then as always, thank you. You guys are amazing. We love our opportunities to interact with you, and we always invite you to reach out if you have any questions or anything that we can help out with. We love, love, love to help. Jeremy has posted in the chat the post-training survey. Oh, and Sharon wisely asks if we need parent permission before she can complete the survey. And the answer is no, you may move forward and complete the survey. Although I will note, I did not include in this survey an adequate notice. The survey should, because I'm collecting data from you, I should have given you a notice that explains the purpose, how it's going to be used, who will have access. So note to self, I'll work on that for the future.